All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to NYACP's March training. I'm Abby Currow, and on behalf of the NYACP Board of Directors, we welcome you here today. We're just thrilled to be offering this program and to have our trainers join us today. I'll ask you guys to all please mute if you're not speaking. That would be great. And but please feel free to use the chat box to ask questions of our speakers. We'll be monitoring the chat box, and there'll also be time for a Q&A session, during the program. So thank you again for joining us. It's my pleasure now to introduce Ken Novenstern, President, and Melissa Goodstein, Vice President of the NYACP.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. We're very excited to be introducing you all to the NYACP and our basic collaborative interdisciplinary training, also called BCIT. Just so you're aware, our last BCIT was back in November 2019. So, it's been a little bit of time, so we're very excited to present this new BCIT in May. In regard to the New York Association of Collaborative Professionals, we're an interdisciplinary association of professionals in the fields of law, mental health, and finance. It serves as the voice of collaborative practice in the greater New York area. As you may know, collaborative divorce is a client-centered approach that enables divorcing and transitioning parties to resolve conflicts in a non-adversarial way, preserving dignity and respect while producing positive outcomes. The NYACP helps its members maximize their potential and advance their practices through networking, training, and increased public awareness of the benefits of collaborative practice with a goal of transforming how people resolve conflict.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for that. So part of NYACP's mission is to empower members to achieve excellence in collaborative practice and skills. And to that end, NYACP offers a variety of training programs. We have trainings at least once a month. I co-chair the Training and Education Committee with Tony Marcus, and we have a myriad of different topics that we offer at least once a month for our members. And we also have monthly pod meetings, which is regionally based. We have 3 pods. New York City pod that meets, I believe, the second Tuesday of the month. Okay. And the first Tuesday of the month is the Long Island pod. And then we also have a Northern Westchester pod that meets on the 3rd Wednesday of the month. And it's really opportunities for practice for members to speak on a variety of topics, as well as to bring outside speakers in. And it's really fantastic and a great member benefit. We also offer support and development groups, which are, I think, the price of admission for membership, because it's just a tremendous opportunity to really further the growth of collaborative and really get support and development in our practices. And those also meet monthly and is a benefit that we offer to members. But most importantly, the NYACP is a place where like-minded folks can network and become supportive colleagues and friends. And I've been a member for, I don't even know how long, but I know that I have so many colleagues that have become my really close friends, and I am so grateful for that. We have now about 110 members, and we're excited that so many of you have come today to learn more about us and about collaborative practice. And you have already taken the first step to become a collaborative practitioner by just wanting to find a better way to help divorcing families. And the next step is to get the required training. All 3 disciplines need to complete a 36 to 40 hour mediation training, and then the BCIT training, or the basic collaborative training. And we recommend that you do the mediation also. We may have that.
I planted that seed.
Yeah, you did. Ken planted that. But meditation is also really important. I practice that, and we may have some training moving forward. But the mediation training is really important, and that's going to be required prior to the BCIT, because many of the collaborative protocols and practices are based in mediation. And once you have completed the mediation training, our BCIT is one of the best in the nation. And we are really, not underestimating this. We really have the best trainers in the nation, or perhaps maybe internationally, who are going to be presenting and providing the training. So you'll be fully prepared to start working on a team. And then as an added benefit, NYACP also offers networking mentoring programs for our members. I am part of that program. I'm learning as a mentee, as a mentor, just as much as my mentee. A big shout out to Morgan Anthony, who is my mentee. And it's just been a great, fantastic program that we're offering for members and for new members, especially to get into the mentoring program. That will really help you, guide you through the process until you're comfortable moving ahead on your own. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter. It's Alana Katz. Alana is a senior faculty member of the Ackerman Institute for the Family and a founding board member of the New York Center for Emotionally Focused Therapy. Alana was one of the first therapists in New York to become certified in emotionally focused therapy, an approach that helps clients understand and change their patterns in key relationships. And she's now a certified EFT trainer and the co-chair of ICE EFT Diversity Committee. And Alana has applied her knowledge of attachment and relational dynamics to help mediation and collaborative law clients intercept the reoccurring patterns that shape high conflict divorce. And personally, I have worked with Alana on a number of committees. Number one, we're working on a diversity committee to help NYACP members understand how systemic racism impacts us professionally and personally. And I'm so excited to be working with Alana and my other great team member, committee members on that. So Ken, do you want to introduce Catherine?
Yes, and I'd just like to quickly say that, the NYACP, it's more than just collaborative divorce and trainings and all of that. It's tremendous. But, just as an example, in working with Alana, she was kind enough to guide me several years ago with a personal issue and introduced me to an organization called PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Gay. And Alana, you're going to have to give the full Parents and Friends of Gay and Lesbian. And I'm sure that's too short right now, but I'm dealing with a transgender situation issue in my own family. And so it's really amazing to have the access to these mental health professionals. And with regard to Catherine, I would just say I had the tremendous benefit of doing trainings with Catherine at her office in New Rochelle back in 2008, 9, 10, when there would be 6 or 7 of us sitting around with her and doing, essentially one-on-one training, which was tremendous. Mm-hmm. And so that still sticks with me. So to introduce Catherine Isold Miller is a mediator and collaborative lawyer with more than 30 years experience. She is the founder of the Miller Law Group with offices in New York City and Westchester. Catherine is also a director and trainer of the Center for Understanding in Conflict and has taught numerous mediation programs in New York and nationally, and is recognized as a preeminent mediation trainer. Catherine hosts the radio show and podcast Divorce Dialogues and is the author of The New Yorker's Guide to Collaborative Divorce and co-author of A Cup of Coffee with 10 of the top divorce attorneys in the United States. So Alana and Catherine, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Ken and Melissa.
Yes, thank you. So is it all right, Catherine, if I just launch out with our phone call example? Is that cool?
It's totally what I'm expecting.
All right, great. And maybe just before we do that, if we could just take advantage of the chat. And as you can hear, we start to become a family together. And that was very gracious of you, Ken, to share that experience, that memory that we have. But if you could just maybe put in the chat where you're signing in from, and also what are you an attorney? Are you a mental health professional? Are you finance, or maybe even a combination? Sometimes it would be just great for us to know who's in the room with us if you get a chance. So
if I could just say, Abby, chat is disabled right now. So if you could do something to make that happen, that would be great.
Oh, that means that's why nobody's responding. Usually if I say something like that, people are responsive. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
It's working now.
Great. All right. So regardless of what profession you are immersed in at this point in your career, I think we all get this kind of phone call that I got this week. My phone rings and there's a woman on the other end of the phone and she says, I have to talk to you. She says, I don't want to get divorced, but I have to get divorced. I cannot stay in my marriage any longer. My husband says he still loves me, but he is also maintaining another relationship, another romantic relationship, and I can't do it. It's just not me. And we have 4 kids. We have 4 kids, tweens and teens, and they don't see the conflict. In fact, they see my husband being very nice to me. She says, what am I going to do? How do I do this? How do I get divorced? And what am I going to say to these kids who are probably going to think that I'm the problem, right? And so just think for a minute about the phone calls that you get in your offices that bring you here. And what happens when the phone rings like that? Catherine, do you want to?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's really an interesting problem that this particular woman and everyone who is considering divorce faces. How am I going to extricate myself from this situation in a way that doesn't blow up my life and makes as orderly a transition as possible, and that isn't going to cost me that much? And I say those words with a smile because cost could be interpreted in a number of different ways, right? So of course, there's always the cost in dollars, right? But there's the cost in my lifestyle. There's the cost in my relationships and my reputation with my children. There's the cost of the time it's going to take and how much I'm going to be distracted and basically hijacked from my life. And so that is a concern of pretty much everybody who considers divorce, whether or not they're the ones choosing the divorce or they're the ones responding to their spouse's decision that they no longer want to be married. And, you know, it's really interesting. I remember way back when I was first introduced to collaborative in 2003 and reading Pauline Tesler's original book. And she writes in the introduction to that book that the choice of how, I'm paraphrasing, so it's not a direct quote, but it's pretty darn close. The choice of how people are going to make the divorce decisions is the single most important decision they are going to make in the entire divorce process. The choice of how it's going to impact how they feel about themselves going through the divorce. It's going to impact the way they feel about their spouse, and it's going to really impact the outcome that they get and how happy they are with that outcome. And I think that that is such a crucial thing that people really need to understand, that they have to make a choice and they can do it in a reactive way. Well, I'm just going to do what everybody else does. So I'm afraid and I'm looking to protect myself. I'm going to lawyer up, right? and hire someone and just do the aggressive thing because that's what I think I need to do in order to protect myself and my children. But I think that the premise of collaborative, and frankly, the premise of my entire career, is that that's wrong-headed, that really thinking about it from a careful, proactive, considerate perspective, sorting through all of the elements makes the most sense. And statistically makes the most sense because in New York State, 97% of divorcing people settle before a judge makes a decision after a trial, which means 3% chance of going to trial. That's pretty small, and nationwide that statistic is 95%. So making a decision what your client or the potential client is going to do is really important. And we could certainly talk about what the various options are, but collaboratives first and foremost, I think, when someone is thinking about protecting their children, making a transition that is supportive and constructive to a different kind of arrangement, especially when there isn't like a major catastrophe where something particular has happened that really does require some kind of legal protection.
And Catherine, if I could just add there, I often tell people that number, the 97% number, because most people want to feel that they're doing the best they can and getting the best product they can, getting the best services they can. And if you listen to what's out there primarily in the dominant culture, they don't make movies about people who sadly but wisely reach a fork in the road and say, listen, we have to take this apart, but let's try to do it with care and respect and think about and keep our kids in the center. You know, they make movies called War of the Roses and people, you know, burn
Kramer
the
versus Kramer.
right, burn the village with the women and children in it. So that's the model that most people have because that's the one that's more visible. We're getting a little bit of a change with conscious uncoupling and some other language coming out there, but people are hearing that. And if you think that train wreck is coming for you, of course, you're going to want to try to prepare yourself for the wreck and for the war, right? So just helping people know that actually, one way or another, people usually do wind up making their decisions.
Yeah. So should we talk a little bit, Alana, about sort of what I think of as the choice continuum for
Right.
people who are making the decision to divorce?
Perfect. Yes.
Do you want to start with that or do you want me to?
Well, I think I'll start, and maybe I'll start at the low tech end, and you can go into the high octane.
Sure.
So, you know, I think every once in a while there are people who can go to Starbucks and kind of on the back of a napkin figure out what they want to do and look up in some, you know, mode how to file papers and figure out how to do it yourself. Just like there are people who renovate their own kitchens. Most of us wouldn't recommend that. But there are people who try to figure it out completely by themselves. And we probably don't wind up talking to those folks unless you're a therapist who's gotten people to a point where they've made that decision in therapy. And then next up the line is mediation, which is a field that many of us worked in a lot side by side in the New York area before collaborative was a choice, right? And I often tell people, most of the time when people are mediating, if you were a fly on the wall, it would look like a therapy session. There's one professional sitting with two clients. There are variations on it, but this is the more common one. And we're relying on each person being able to speak up in their own voice, right? We're relying on them being able to listen to the other person even when they disagree. And they can have and in fact, best practices are to have a consulting attorney, you know, on the side, but primarily they are speaking directly to each other and to the mediator, one professional sitting with the two of them through the bulk of the process. All right. And then do you want to pick up from here, Catherine?
Sure. You know, and it's sometimes in the mediation process, lawyers come into the room and you can have them in the room all the time from first session. You could have them in the room when the parties and the mediator feel that it's going to be a particularly challenging situation or there's going to be a discussion about the law, right? And because as a mediator, when you only have the parties in the room and they say, well, my lawyer says this, well, my lawyer says that, that's a really tough situation because you can't have a conversation with people who aren't in the room. Or you could have them not in the room at all. But I think what's really important about these first two ideas of DIY, right, and mediation is that people are working to come to a resolution on the dissolution of their marriage or the transition of their relationship based on their own personal criteria, what's important to them, how they see the situation and how they want to deal with each other and how that and what of those criteria they want to use, what reference points they want to use to make the transition from married to unmarried, right? And as we move along this continuum toward litigation, which is obviously the most extreme and formal process that there is, we move kind of toward settling in the context of the law, which is a series of principles and predictions by attorneys as to what a judge might do. Since only 3% actually find out what a judge will do, that's the law of anyone's individual case. And so I really want to make that point that people in mediation and the DIY are really thinking about what's important to them and maybe some shared criteria about the reference points that they're going to use to make a decision, which might include what they've been told by their lawyers. But I think that's really more an idea of what do other people do. I've never been divorced before, so let me just find out what other people have done, what other people have thought about, because I don't know what I don't know. And so as we move, well, I'm going to skip to the end because I think it's really easier to understand collaborative in the frame of mediation and litigation. So, if people are going to now on the other end of the spectrum, move toward litigation, and I did this for 12 or 15 years at the beginning of my career, basically all good lawyers and are going to try to settle the case, right? They're going to try to do what is very likely to happen, but they're going to do a lot of prep work before they get there. So I always think of it as being on two horses or two trains. You're on two tracks. You're heading towards trial as a lawyer, and you're doing everything that you need to do in order to be prepared. This isn't because you're a bad lawyer. This is because you're a good lawyer, because it would frankly be malpractice not to do everything that you need to do. So that's formal discovery. That might include depositions, subpoenas, notices of discovery and inspection, motion practice to figure out, the interim situation and temporary situations and prepare for this trial that would ultimately, if it does happen, can take weeks, and it doesn't necessarily go day to day. And so at the same time, you're trying to find a resolution that works for the people. Now, typically, as a lawyer, I'm trying to find a settlement, and I'm making arguments that are based on the law in that context. But I'm also talking to my client about what's important to her and how he sees the situation and whatever it is that's going on. And I'm trying to put together a settlement package, but I'm having a lot of conversations with my adversary, the other lawyer, about what we can do to settle this at the same time that we're really moving this train toward the trial too. And as you can imagine, that these two tracks, and as everyone I'm sure in the Zoom room is aware, these are kind of in conflict with each other, right? But it does provide a lot of information and support for the client who doesn't know what he or she doesn't know, has fears and concerns that they're going to be taken advantage of, or they're going to get too little or pay too much, or that somehow or other they're not going to be able to maintain their lifestyle or maintain what's most important to them going forward. They might not be having conversations about that, but that's happening there. And another thing that the litigation process does is it moves the divorce forward. A lot of times people on the other end, coming into the divorce process, I've just been talking to a client about this recently. Well, my wife says she's not going to cooperate, and so the litigation process makes them cooperate. It's the one way you can move it forward, regardless of the kicking and screaming objections of the other person. And so there are some definite advantages to litigation, and there are some definite disadvantages too. And I think that what collaborative is an effort to put together the best of mediation and DIY and the best of litigation into a supportive process that helps people resolve the divorce issues based on their own criteria with full knowledge of the law, and allows the process to move forward, because it is a very structured process. It doesn't have the power of the court, but it has the power of the collaborative team who makes agreements on agendas and timeframes and information exchange and all of that. But collaborative also, I should say, not but add something really invaluable that we could add into mediation and we could add into litigation, but we rarely do. And that is this interdisciplinary approach where, this is how I think of it. I think of divorce as a knitting basket that a kitten got into and played with all the different colored yarns. And so they're all like twisted together, and you've got your red and your blue and your yellow and all of that. And it's all, you pull on the yellow and the red and the blue and the green come with, because it's all tangled up. And if you think about these at the different elements of the marriage relationship, right? The intimate relationship, the co-parenting relationship, the financial relationship, the time structure and division of labor relationship. And you're looking at each of these as a different color in the knitting basket, and it's all twisted together and all knotted up. In the collaborative process, when we're bringing in an interdisciplinary team, and the blue professional is going to work on the blue yarn, and the yellow professional is going to work on the yellow yarn, and then working together as a team, we can not only untangle the yarn in the most cooperative and amicable way possible. And I'm not saying people coming into the collaborative process, hold hands and sing kumbaya while they decide to divorce. These are very angry people. And Alana and I have had some very high conflict. Some of the most high conflict cases of my life have been resolved successfully in the collaborative process, not in litigation. And then not only that, but we can kind of weave together, and maybe I'm going a little too far with this analogy, but we can weave together a new scarf or a new sweater that is maybe not what the people who bought the yarn in the first place were intending when they bought the yarn, but really does work to help this family move forward in the most successful way possible.
Right. And I like the analogy a lot, actually, Catherine. And if I may, what I say to myself, what I say to my team, and what I say to my clients sometimes is technically what we're asking of clients in a divorce process is something that really nobody should be able to do. I'm not talking about people who've been living apart for 8 years and they're finally getting around to their paperwork and they don't have any kids to sort out. But most people, even when they come in and say, I want this to be amicable, they are probably going through one of the most difficult times of their life. The brain is hardwired for the emotional brain to take over in distress, right? And to try to protect and protect and protect any way possible. And when you think about what people need to do to get divorced, you need tremendous access to your left brain. You need to be able to look at information. You need to be able to analyze it. You need to be able to project into the future. What are my needs going to be in 6 months? What are they going to be in 6 years? A lot of very brain function that requires people to be at their best when they are emotionally likely feeling at their worst. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so terribly difficult. And that's where I think having a team to approach this can really help the clients a lot and also help the professionals in terms of pacing, in terms of having effective meetings, because the goal isn't just to have more and more meetings. The goal is to have effective meetings.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what it's like for the professionals to work this way, because I think this is a colleague of ours said to me a number of years ago, I thought mediation was the hardest thing I ever did in my life until I became a collaborative lawyer, because we're really asking a lot, but we're getting a lot too. So if I could just indulge me for a minute, let me tell you a little bit about my personal history, all of you. I went to law school because I was interested in justice. I figured out in orientation week, that's not what law school was going to be about. And mostly that's not what the law is about either, not for nothing. But I have a plan B. I come from a family of psychotherapists. And so I've always been really interested in people. I thought that when I was considering what I was going to do with my life, that I'm too bossy to be a psychotherapist. It turns out that you can be a bossy psychotherapist, but I didn't know that at the time. In any event, so law school was, and I turned my attention to really the intersection of the law and people in their personal lives, because I think that's a really interesting thing that we're not educated about as young people. And so I became a family lawyer out of law school. And after 2 years of practice, I took a mediation practice, my first mediation training, because I thought, oh my gosh, there has to be a better way to help people resolve conflict. We're settling most of our cases, but we just aren't settling around the issues that make the most importance to the people. And we should be having conversations about that, not so much about what I think Judge so-and-so is going to decide, and this sort of very high conflict practice that I had in New York City. And after that mediation training, I started to try to integrate those mediative ideas into my divorce negotiations. And in every single case, I ran into the same problem, and that problem was the other lawyer. And not that they were bad lawyers or bad people, but we just couldn't get on the same page about what we were trying to do and how we were going to do it. So after about 10 years of that very frustrating experience, I got divorced myself, and I sat in the client chair. And although my husband, who was a high conflict person, and I weren't able to settle in mediation, there was no collaborative. We did settle in a conference room, and never going to court. We had a very creative resolution to our divorce. And after that experience, I thought, you know what, I don't think I can actually do this anymore. And I took steps to leave the law. I thought, I'm just going to look for something else to do with my life. I took another mediation training. I was doing some mediation. I just thought about just doing something else altogether. And then an early adopter of the collaborative practice in New York, who was a friend of mine, called me and said, listen, Catherine, come, we're doing this collaborative training and you should come to it. And this was not an interdisciplinary process at the time, it was just lawyers. And I said to her, Elizabeth, I did that for 10 years. Remember, same problem every single case, the other lawyer. How could this really be any different? And she said, Catherine, if this is really different, you should come. And I was like, fine, I'll go. But I really didn't expect much. I promise you, I was really cynical about this. Same problem in every case. These lawyers just can't be trusted to really be cooperative about this stuff. And within 15 minutes, and I was very blessed that the training that I took at the time was with Stu Webb, who's the founder of Collaborative Laws, you may or may not know, and Suzanne Brunsting from Rochester, who's a really terrific trainer. And within 15 minutes of them talking about what they were doing and what we were going to learn about, I felt like I had come home. Like, this is what I always wanted to do. And I get goosebumps just right now, just telling you this, because it was such a transformative moment for me that we, the lawyers, and now the whole professional team, even though it's hard, we can really work together to help a family transition and work on the criteria that make the most sense to them, even if they don't agree on what those are. And so I walked out of that training, and I had a guy who had come to talk to me about his divorce 2 weeks before, and his wife didn't know that they were getting divorced yet. And I literally called him from the train, and I'm like, Gene, I just took this training. Who does that? Like, that's how enthusiastic I was. I'm brand new at this thing. Let's try this thing. And we did. And, it was with fits and starts, believe me, not the easiest thing in the world. But that's pretty much what I've dedicated my career to ever since then, because it makes so much sense to me. And it's such a bonding experience. I think Ken said in his introduction about the friendships that he's made in this community, that it really feels like we don't use the word adversary because we're not adversaries, we're colleagues, and we are together trying to find a resolution that makes sense, even and especially in the most difficult moments. And so this training is about that. Like, how do we do that? What are the various threads? What are the techniques? Because I promise you, if you decide to take this, it's going to feel like you're coming with an empty toolbox at first. Now, those of you who are mediators will feel like, well, I've got some of these skills, and you do. What's really interesting, if you've been working in the mediation world, is that how to balance having that mediative idea and consciousness of neutrality and having both people in the frame, and advocacy. And that's when our colleague said that this is the hardest thing he's ever done. That's that balance of going back and forth, and on each side of that kind of seesaw, looking at the whole system from my client's perspective, the whole system, my client's perspective. And that's it's really interesting. It's really challenging. It is quite a learning experience. And the team really allows you to have different perspective about that. So that's been a tremendously interesting piece of my professional development that I assure you I did not expect when I was in law school.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, I've never been a drummer or a professional soccer player, but my understanding is that in each, your right foot and left foot have to be prepared to do totally different things. And I think that's an image that comes to mind when I hear you speak, Catherine, about how do you sort of hold your client's perspective and needs, and also toggle back and forth and think about what's going to work for everyone in this family.
Yeah.
And I also want to add that as a card-carrying family therapist for decades, part of how I got into this field was that we would sit at the Ackerman Institute and we started to realize that people would come in traumatized post-divorce, and it wasn't so much the fact that the parents were not living together anymore, but they would talk at length about what the process had done to them, much more than the fact that they were living separately. And we thought, why not start to get ahead of this? Why not try to do something that would be on the prevention side rather than wait to pick up the pieces when everything had shattered? So it is hard work. I think it does take a team. And that, by the way, in and of itself was a process in our New York community, going from the idea of it being an outlier to have a team to having it be the default. I'm proud to say that I think we're in a community now where the default assumption is this will be a team case unless there's some exception. But it really does, when you think about, all the work, regardless of which field which hat you wear, we do confidential work. We all do confidential work. And so a lot of times we're sitting alone with pretty intense material, pretty difficult situations. And the idea that there's a team here also, I think, is helpful to us.
Yeah. So I think maybe we're starting to get some questions here, but maybe we could talk a little bit about what the training looks like. Wendy, I see your question. I'll answer that in a second. But if I think there are some people here who've taken trainings with me in the past. So the trainings there'll be some pedagogical lecture, but we try to keep that to a minimum, right? We're just going to give you sort of an idea of what we're talking about. We've got some charts, we've got some readings, we have some stuff like that. There'll be role play, and everybody who participates will play the part of your collaborative role, but you'll likely also play a party. A lot that depends on the numbers, how we work it out, but ideally, everybody will have a chance to play both a party to a divorce and a role in the collaborative professional team. There'll be some personal work. We talked a little bit in the beginning about meditation. There'll be a few short meditations, but don't worry about it. We're not going to ask you to do the lotus position or sit on a pillow if that feels uncomfortable, but just to kind of close your eyes and think about how something is landing on you, and some journaling, and then some discussion about how it is landing on you, and maybe by maybe I mean definitely using some of the techniques that we teach in the collaborative training to practice those on this like interpersonal kind of dialogue about the way it works. And so Wendy, the way that we work is that each person has their own collaborative lawyer. Everybody in the collaborative process signs at the beginning a collaborative participation agreement, which is essentially a contract that the parties agree that their lawyers and the entire collaborative team is disqualified from participating with the family in the event that they are not able to resolve it in the collaborative model and move to litigation. So the lawyers are disqualified, the mental health professionals are disqualified, and the financial neutrals are disqualified. And oftentimes when we work with this whole team, the mental health professional is a neutral, and Alana, I'm going to let you talk about that role, and the financial professional is a neutral. And those people, and everybody has mediation training. So the lawyers have mediation trainings, the mental health professionals have mediation training, and the financial neutrals mediation training. So sometimes the team moves all together and everybody is there. That's not always necessary. Sometimes the people work alone with the mental health professional, and we can talk about, I'm going to let Ilana talk about that. And sometimes they'll work alone with the financial neutral. And so those people do have a kind of mediative hat on, I think, anyway. Ilana, you can say if you differ, but there is no, in our area, there is no mediator per se. It's really the neutrals who sort of sit in that central space and sometimes work with a mediative aspect to their role, but no formal mediator, if that answers the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so the role is very flexible. I wish I could tell you, you'll just learn one paradigm and you'll do it that way always. And that would not be true. So what I often say to people is you'll get the question all the time if you are a mental health professional, is this therapy? Can I put into my insurance and get coverage for it? And the answer is no, we're not doing therapy. It is therapeutically informed, our work, but we're really there to help people understand themselves and their partner, what makes it most possible for them to be effective in problem solving. Because at the end of the day, divorce is a series of decisions that people need to reach. And they have history with each other. Tell me what it looks like when the two of you are working effectively. How will I know when conflict starts to show up and the process is not working for you in the room? What does that look like for you, right? Listen, I always meet people together as an initial step, if I'm working as a neutral, and most of the time, not to get too complex in this 1 hour that we have, but most of the time at this point, the mental health professional functions as a family specialist, a neutral who serves both clients, right? So I always like to meet people together. I want them to decide at the same time whether I'm the right person for them or not. And I also want them to know that I heard the story at the same time from each of them. And then I also meet with each person separately to find out what's going to be particularly challenging for them. What are they most concerned about, right? And how can I sit most effectively at the settlement table when we're meeting together as a team with our clients and they start to talk? Sometimes just having a way to distill what is really essential. Somebody can go on at length. I'm not doing this. Hell will freeze over before I walk away from this house and leave everybody else in it. So you're really concerned about being an outsider, that you're really concerned. Is that right? That you would leave and then you would somehow be cut out of the picture. And so it's a lot of that. It's a lot of listening to what is the essence of what people are in conflict about and what are they most concerned about, so that the client who's speaking feels understood and the other client understands what the reactivity is about. We really want to help people make sense of themselves and each other to be able to form a pathway to resolution. It's probably about as much as we can do in this,
Yeah.
But I hope that makes some sense.
So there's a question that maybe Ken or Melissa, you could answer. Is mediation required to attend this training? I think the answer to that is yes, but I'm not exactly sure how you're handling that. Do you want to answer that, one of you?
I'm unfortunately not seeing all the questions. Mine hasn't updated since 12/14, and I'm not sure why.
No.
So, I can address it, but at the end of the day, I think it's really, well, let me address it. My understanding is that, yes, we are requiring the mediation training in advance of the actual training. That was based upon our discussions with Catherine and Alana and the other people in our organization who do trainings. I think in part because it makes it a little bit more difficult to train people with uneven training up to that point. But I'm also open to discussion.
Yeah. So it's my understanding too, just following up, that, it's really strongly encouraged that you have the training before the BCIT training. But as to be a member of NYACP, we do require the mediation training to happen soon thereafter. And we can talk about with limited exception, but that is a requirement. And I think it's just, that's a requirement for our membership to have that training as well.
Right. And we also did our best to make this, we know it's hard to sit in front of a Zoom screen, like for an indefinite period of time. So we also, looking carefully at the material, we thought if everyone came on board with mediation training, we could keep this training as compact as possible to not ask you to sit in front of a screen from 8 to 6, for example, but we could stand on the shoulders of that understanding when we got into the collaborative material.
Yeah. So I think that for a lot of people, at least for attorneys who've been practicing matrimonial law in New York or wherever for any length of time, this is not nuclear waste, right? It makes so much sense. Like, why wouldn't you want to work in a way that really was helpful to people, really help them transition their relationship in a really supportive way, where you work with a team of people you really like? I mean, it sounds fantastic, right? Who wouldn't want to do it? I mean, you might have some concerns. And if you do, I would really hope that you'd pop them in the chat, because I'd rather address them than have you leave here thinking, well, that would work, but X, Y, Z, whatever your objection is, please let us know, because we can address it. But I want to tell you something that it's not going to do. Because another thing you could be thinking is, oh, this is great. I can add a practice area and therefore increase my business. And that is absolutely true. But when you take this training the Monday morning after, whatever the day after is, it's not going to be like a big new highway of new clients coming to you asking for the collaborative process. It's going to take a while for you to build that practice. And because normally people aren't going to come to you until you build your reputation for this, asking for the collaborative process. It's not so much out there in the world. It took mediation 30 years before people came in asking for mediation. So we've only been around, 20 years. So we're still working on that. But people do. There are people out there who know enough about the collaborative process to ask for it, but they're generally going to look to people who have collaborative reputations, right? I get that in my practice. And I told you my first training was in 2003. I'm a past president of NYACP. I was vice president of NYACP for 11 years, I think. I've done many, many trainings in this area. And I am pretty vocal in my outbound marketing about the collaborative practice and the benefits of it. And, including, as Ken said in our introduction, having a radio show where we talk about it all the time. So people ask for it when they come to me, but when they come to you afterwards, you're going to have to reframe it and say to them, have you thought about the collaborative process? And like I said to Jean, hey, I just took this training and I think it's really good for you because X, Y, Z. If you do, obviously, I don't want you to do that if it's a lie. It's not hard to do because it's really easy to transition people's ideas from fear to a place of feeling hopeful about their future if they have any desire to do that. And so it's going to be on you, and we'll talk about it in the training, but it's going to be on you in some regards to make a transition and change of your career and your casework to building your own collaborative process with the help of NYACP and with all the things that Melissa talked about, the organization doing that helps you do that.
Thank you, Catherine. We had a question from Carmen. Is there a specific mediation training required? So the training that we require is a 36 to 40-hour course. And Catherine, maybe you can speak, or Alana, I know that Catherine, you do this mediation training. Do you want to give a little bit of that about?
So Part 146 is completely different. And a Part 146 training requires, in order to be on the roster, you need to have a 3-day, so a basic training that is 3 days. So it's 24 hours of basic mediation training, plus to be on the matrimonial roster, you need an additional 16 hours of specific mediation training. NYACP requires a little bit more than that. Doesn't require those two trainings together. The two trainings together would meet the NYACP requirement. Or you could take just a 40-hour basic mediation training through the Center for Understanding in Conflict, which you can find at understandinginconflict.org. And by we, in the New York area, I teach a mediation training. We have one starting on, I think it's the last Wednesday in April, which I think is the 27th in Connecticut. which is too far to commute unless you happen to live there, for those of you on the train, which will start on Wednesday afternoon and go till Sunday at lunch, which I'm doing with Antoinette Delruel. I think there are people in the room who've taken that training. I think it's pretty good.
Oh, it's excellent. I can attest to that. It was excellent. And on our website, we also have a link to all of the trainings, the mediation trainings. So if you take a look at that, you can find that, including Catherine's, which is, one of the best trainings I've ever taken, Catherine. I mean, Catherine is
Thank you.
It was really excellent. So I encourage you. So I think Wendy has a question. When is the next training? I guess we answered that. The next training that we do have is the center, which is the third week in April 27th. So you can get some more information on that from our website and the website that Catherine reported.
And just a quick question, Catherine and Alana, in terms of the issue of mediation training beforehand and this section or part 146, I mean, how comfortable are the two of you with someone who may have had the part 146 training, but not the full training attending?
That would work for me, I think. I think it's really just an idea of what are some of these mediative ideas, focusing on criteria that are beyond just the shadow of the law, some of the techniques and thinking about it, just having that previous experience just makes these collaborative ideas land a little more easily. Alana, what do you think?
I agree. I think we just want to give people, especially if you're used to sort of championing one person's perspective and experience, just to have some time that you have sat in a role of neutrality. That's what we really want you to have, that a felt sense of that. I'm hoping there might even be some things that people could do online if somebody's in that situation where they say, I really want to join you in May, but I don't have this yet, and we're almost at April. What do I do? I'm just wondering if there are even some online resources for people to at least get something in their bones so they can still join us.
Yeah, so I put, by the way, in the chat a link to the requirements so that you can take a look at that. It'll be a really helpful resource for everyone.
Beautiful. Right. And I think it went out in the description of today, but I just want to make sure that people know that there is a financial person who also teaches with us. Because of this time of year, it was just too difficult for him to pull away. But Steve Kaplan is an extremely experienced financial professional who's weathered some very, very challenging cases with us. And taught with us extensively. Yeah. And you'll be in very good hands from the financial point of view as well.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Ilana, because I think that there's something that people really should understand about the power of the financial neutral. And if for those of you who are mediators or who've mediated, you understand that there's this sort of magical neutrality. It doesn't happen at day one, but just the fact that the people have agreed to come in and meet with the mediator gives you a little bit of a trust that if you do it right, you can build that trust, and where you have real this magic place where people can talk about things that seemed previously untalkable about, whatever that would be.
Unspeakable.
Yes. And the thing about money is that it is so much more in our culture than a way to pay the bills, right? It is how we measure power and success and compare ourselves to our families of origin, our neighbors, and maybe even each other. And so when money comes into the divorce conversation, which of course is a major part of it, it's really difficult because it has that overlay of all those other aspects. And when we put neutrality in the form of the financial neutral around those issues about money, sure, I've been a matrimonial lawyer for 35 years. Ken, when you were reading my bio, I'm like, maybe I should update it, but maybe it makes me sound too old. I can do a lot of this stuff myself. I can't do a business valuation, but I can do a lot, but I can't be neutral if I represent one side. And so the fact that we bring this neutrality in and put it specifically around the issue of money, which is so complicated and so emotionally nuanced and layered and complex, that makes a huge difference in the collaborative process to help us get through some really difficult issues, because it allows us to separate a way to pay the bills and a division of assets, and actually separate out money in the way that for what it does for us from all that emotional overlay. And that is incredibly powerful. When you see it happen, it's amazing and really a wonderful thing to see.
And I'm a big believer that you can say almost anything to anybody depending on how you say it. And, you know, one of the things, the gifts I think of the financial people in our community is the way they also deliver material so that people can digest it. There's a way to say, listen, the spreadsheet's done. Kids are going to have to leave private school. There's just no way about it, you know, da, 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 da. And there's a way to say, all right, let's look at this together. Here's what we've got. These are some of your options. And we're going to help you figure out the next steps. Right. And I think people often have to absorb very difficult information in this process, and how they hear it and how we help them through that is essential.
Yeah. So there's a question from Randy about people who've already been trained attending this training. And I always think it's a good idea. I've taken a ton of different collaborative trainings because people present the material in different ways, and we have different ways there are different aspects that come out, and it's always interesting to do that. And I think for a community to work in the same model really makes a big difference. I've done a lot of presentations in various collaborative groups around the country. And one of the first questions I have them, like a little exercise I have them do, is a small group discussion about what collaborative means to them. And it's really amazing how different people feel about it. And if you come in and I'm expecting one thing, and Ilana, you're expecting another thing, and we don't talk about what it is we're expecting, and then we're going to get it, we're going to have a problem in our case, because my expectations of what I'm doing are different than your expectations, and there's kind of a disconnect. So I think that's a great idea.
Excellent. I know we're just about at that.
Yeah, we are. Does anyone, I think, you know, it's about 1 o'clock. I don't see any other questions in the chat. But so I really wanted to thank you, Catherine and Ilana, for the presentation. It was so informative. I always learn something new, and it promises to be a really fantastic training. For our attendees, if you think if you can think of any additional questions after the program, and if you'd like some more information, please feel free to reach out to us directly. Abby Curo is our executive director, and it's the office at, you know, go to the site, go to the email that you got this link for, and Abby could certainly address any questions you have. We sincerely hope that you sign up for the BCIT training and begin your journey to become a collaborative professional. And thank you again for making the time to join us today. Stay safe, healthy, and enjoy the weekend. It's Friday.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ilana and Catherine. Thank you, everyone.
Friday.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.